All right, everyone. Howdy, good morning. Welcome to Chicago if you're not from here. My name is Bethany Bennick. I am our Deputy Global Team Leader of Water and Wastewater Technologies for the U.S. Commercial Service, International Trade Administration, U.S. Department of Commerce. Unnecessarily long title, but wanted to give you the context of where we fall. I am based domestically here in Chicago, Illinois, and we help support Chicagoland companies in their export journeys, quite a bit of climate infrastructure companies at that. We have a large panel today, so I won't take up too much more time. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, talk about a few of their key points that they want you to glean from the work that they have been doing on public infrastructure projects, and then we'll dive right into two different rounds of questions. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and invite Bill.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Bill Selbig. I am a research hydrologist with the U.S. Geological Survey in the Upper Midwest Water Science Center. The USGS, if you aren't familiar, we are the nation's largest environmental data collection agency. You probably are mostly familiar with our Hazards Bureau, which looks at earthquakes and volcanoes. That's the more glamorous bureau within the USGS, but there are others as well. We do biology, mapping, ecosystems, and water, and that is the agency, the bureau that I work in is water resources research, covering groundwater, surface water, and ecosystems, and they're all kind of interwoven. The majority of the work that I do is somewhat unique within the USGS. Stream gauging is our bread and butter, where we monitor the nation's lakes and rivers and groundwater resources. But I have somehow fallen into urban hydrology and specifically stormwater. I work a lot with municipalities, regulated communities, state agencies, watershed organizations, NGOs, but also all of our other partner federal agencies that examine the health of our nation's water resources. In particular, for urban stormwater, that's a little bit more narrow, where we look at water quality. So a lot of MS4s or regulated municipalities have to meet a total maximum daily load, or a TMDL. So many pounds of phosphorus can go into this receiving water body, and how are they going to do that? There's a number of different tools that they can implement, particularly green infrastructure. And so I examine the health of green infrastructure, the performance of these various practices, whether they be biofilters, permeable pavement, tree canopy, and the like. How well do they work? And how many of these do you need in order to meet that load reduction? How can you tweak them? How do you can change the design in order to optimize the efficiency of that particular practice so that they don't waste a lot of resources and finances trying to do the same thing poorly over and over? But we also look at some of the other elements, like unintended consequences of putting in green infrastructure or other types of practices. And humans, we're very good at that. We're very good at thinking that this is the way that this should be done, and 20 years later realize, like, oh, why did we do it that way? And now look what we're facing. And a good example of that is road salt, where we see road salt is applied to prevent hazardous driving conditions, but there's an environmental cost to that. And particularly when you have snow melt, or if you have runoff where road salt was applied, all of that seeps into the ground. And we're in a case now where public drinking water supplies are being contaminated, where in my community, Madison, it's just 2 hours to the north, we're having to shut down groundwater aquifer or public wells because the chloride levels are getting too high, where you can actually taste chloride in the drinking water, and people who have certain health conditions can't do that. So it's a big public issue, and hopefully the science that we do can help make better informed decisions for the managers out there and how to prevent these types of conditions. Leave it there.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that context there. I'm going to toss it over to Brian.
Good morning, everyone. few people have welcomed you today to the city of Chicago, but let me welcome you to Cook County. I am a program manager with the Cook County Department of Environment and Sustainability. Cook County is maybe best known for being the site of the city of Chicago, but we are the second largest county by population in the nation with 5.2 million people. And there are 134 municipalities within Cook County. At the Department of Environment Sustainability, we have a couple of functions. Some are regulatory, where we work with demolition permits, air quality, and things like that. But we also do work on sustainability and climate resilience. In particular, I manage a couple of programs where we're working with communities to do both climate resilience plans to investigate how hazards are changing, what hazards communities are exposed to now, how those are evolving, and what kinds of investments the communities could be making to kind of shore themselves up. And we also have funding to implement some of those recommendations. We're also working to develop resilience hubs in a few communities, which involves, retrofitting existing or new community centers to serve as resources before, during, and after disasters and other crises. And the department has other work as well, where we're working with industrial businesses to diminish impacts to the environment, installing public EV charging at public facilities, and things like that. So our work is all guided by the county's policy roadmap, which includes goals for sustainable communities. So it's a real priority for the county, and we're looking both to shore up infrastructure the county controls and invests in directly, and what I do, which is more working with our municipal partners to help them prioritize and line up the investments that they're making in the infrastructure that they're responsible for.
Thanks so much. And we turn right around and help those private sector companies export those products and service for global RFP opportunities. And a true welcome from out of town. I'm going to toss it over to Earl. Welcome to Chicago from beautiful Colorado.
Yes, thank you so much. Hard to follow up from these two gentlemen here, but at the City and County of Denver, Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer. In addition to that, I serve on the Committee for Climate Change Adaptation and Extreme Weather at the Transportation Research Board. So a lot of work in that space. So the transportation and infrastructure piece, in addition to knowing what many believe is the traditional responsibilities of a DOT, we also have responsibility for the city's storm and wastewater infrastructure, facilities, and citywide fleet management. And so big focus area right now is fleet electrification, as well as greening up facilities, which together make up the largest portion of GHG emissions. And so a lot of work around that space.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Earl. All right, Jim.
Hi, my name is Jim Doughton and come from the city of Minneapolis, where I'm the Carbon Sequestration Program Manager. As far as I know, I'm the only one in the country with that title, but that's not my doing. But what I work with is a thing called biochar. I don't know if any of you have heard it, but we are using waste wood to create biochar and integrate it into our city operations and across the metropolitan area, including stormwater and urban forestry, two key things deal with public infrastructure. And we've integrated it into our climate equity plan, which places our climate action plan, and in putting biochar into our green spaces to address heat-on effect, increase stormwater infiltration, clean stormwater, put it in our stormwater BMPs to improve their performance. And now we're also looking at biochar in soil health applications, transportation corridors with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, carbon sequestration with Pollution Control Agency, et cetera. So we have a number of initiatives coming in. We are one of the first cities in North America to develop a biochar program. We received a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies to actually produce biochar. So currently I'm in the process of developing a biochar production facility right next to the University of Minnesota that I was hoping to be open this fall, but it looks like next spring as we'll actually be in production. Also board of directors on the North American Biochar Council, doing business as the U.S. Biochar Initiative. And just as a shameless plug, 2025 USBI conference will be in Minnesota or Minneapolis. So if you want to learn more about biochar, please stop by and join about 1,200 people from around the world as we explore things. And the topic here is the development of municipal biochar programs. Last thing I want to say about this as well is that in our climate equity plan, we are looking at achieving carbon neutrality by the year 2050. One thing I've learned is that you cannot achieve carbon neutrality strictly by limiting your emissions and working on the emissions side. You need a carbon negative component in order to achieve carbon neutrality. To get rid of some of those emissions, you just can't abate. And so what biochar does, it's a carbon negative technology that not only provides environmental benefits, but also allows you to achieve carbon neutrality while staying within our carbon budget. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Jim. I should have mentioned Minnesota is also beautiful, and welcome. Last but not least, we've got Richard.
Hello, my name is Richard Fisher. I'm a principal civil engineer at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago. We are the stormwater authority for Cook County, basically all of Cook County, 130 communities in the city of Chicago. I'm a principal civil engineer. Primarily what I do is work on developing, planning stormwater projects where my mission is very focused. One thing about stormwater is I kind of consider it's kind of like the redheaded stepchild of infrastructure. Like you usually have water, drinking water, roads, sanitary sewer, and then the last thing anybody thinks about is stormwater because it's the least used of the utilities that we have. But it's one of the ones that can create the most damages. One of the things that we're working on that I'm really excited about at the district is we've kind of developed this, I would consider a decision matrix. We call it the volumetric approach. And really it's about how do you engage the decision makers that decide, to make the investments in stormwater. A lot of times, I think Ty was talking about some of our terminology that we use is kind of foreign to a lot of the decision makers because they're not engineers. And it's one of the big struggles that we have is communicating the necessity and need for stormwater infrastructure. So this volumetric approach kind of breaks down the kind of the need for each community to a volume approach. You can solve pretty much any flooding issue if you have enough volume. And if you say, oh, well, you need 100,000 gallons to solve this, that's a really easy currency for non-engineers to kind of understand. It's really easily translatable to dollars too. So it's something that we're really excited about, and we're hoping that to really kind of help push the ball forward as far as it goes with flooding in Cook County.
And as somebody who's from Arizona, I've experienced a few of these floods here, and I think they're pretty well managed. We have different versions of floods in Arizona, the flash kind that can be deadly. So I'm going to loop Bill back into the conversation. You had talked a little bit about green infrastructure, specifically around permeable pavement and vegetation for cooling. Can you elaborate on how these strategies have been implemented successfully in specific projects and what metrics you use to determine their effectiveness?
Yeah, sure. So there's a diversity of different types of green infrastructure practices out there. And by the way, there's a historical context here. Green infrastructure is just the term we're using now, but it used to be called back in the 80s low impact development, conservation practice design, SCMs, stormwater control measures, best management practices, et cetera. I could go on, but it's sort of like how do we just change the term for the exact same thing? And that is, how do you address non-point source runoff? Non-point source runoff is diffuse runoff off of a parking lot, a lawn, a driveway, streets, roofs, etc. There are a number of probably the one that is most often used in the municipality is a rain garden or a biofilter or a bioswale. Homeowners often use that. And it's just basically a shallow depression in the earth with native plants and some soil amends and engineered soil, and it receives the runoff and does a filtering process as well. Permeable pavement it's been around for quite some time, but within the last 5 to 10 years, it's really the engineering has improved a lot. And in my opinion, this is not the official position of the federal government, but in my opinion, I think permeable pavement is probably, in the terms of context of climate change, is probably one of the best that you can do to replace impervious surfaces with pervious. I think every alleyway, every parking lane, every parking lot should be use permeable pavement in some form. We could have a large discussion about which are better than others. You have porous asphalt, you have pervious concrete, permeable pavers, and they all have their positives and negatives associated with them. They do some water quality filtering and the like. But in terms of climate change, since this is a climate change panel, permeable pavement is quite diverse. In the summertime, it provides cooling. Because you have an aggregate base underneath, which is usually 18 inches to 24 inches below the surface, and so as runoff filters through that permeable surface, it cools down. In the winter, it's the opposite. It provides a warming effect, and so there's been studies out there saying you don't need as much road salt applied on your parking lot because of the underlying heat that is stored within the earth itself. You can't get away with zero, but you don't need to put a whole bunch on. And there's been some studies that suggest there's up to 75% reduction in road salt is needed. So it has this duality of a seasonal duality in terms of temperature. Canopy, tree canopy is another one that there's been studies out there that we've done, that the USGS has done, showing, and this really shouldn't be any surprise to anyone, that tree canopy is a great thing. Shading, evaporative cooling. We should have as much street tree canopy as possible. It's somewhat of a double-edged sword because there is a water quality component. Trees are natural systems, and the leaves have a lot of phosphorus content. And in the fall, especially up here in the northern tier, those leaves fall into the ground and onto the street surface, and the phosphorus leaches from them. So we have to be, our urban foresters have to be cognizant of the fact that trees provide multiple ecosystem services, not just habitat, not just runoff reduction from the canopy layer, but also a water quality component. I'll leave it there, so give some time to the other panelists.
Oh, absolutely. Appreciate that perspective. Jim, to kind of expand on green infrastructure on the biochar side, can you explain how it's used and its specific benefits for stormwater management? And have there been any measurable improvements or changes in how it's been implemented?
No, some great questions, and also playing off what my partner had said as well, is that one of the aspects we're looking at is with the tree canopy with biochar, and I'll get to the other part. But we're using biochar as in replacing our trees as we come in with bare root stock with biochar and compost to improve survivability and thrivability. And so we've been developing up methods for bare root stock. One of the problems we've had is that we had a thing called Dutch elm disease come through. We had great elm trees over the city. It was fantastic. Dutch elm wiped them out. So we replaced them with ash trees, and now we had emerald ash borer come through. And as a city, we had to remove every one of our ash trees. And now 90% of the remaining public trees are coming down. And so we have to replace those. And so we lost those effects in a huge reversal in both urban heat island effect, the cooling from transpiration, et cetera. So we're using biochar to help replace that, as well as that wood would normally go 97% right back into the atmosphere through either mulch, electrical production, or whatever you use it for. With biochar, we're taking 50% of that carbon and locking it away for hundreds to thousands of years. So that's part of the equation. In the general stormwater, what we're using it for are a couple different things. The traditional BMPs, we're currently working with our public works to study how this would be in those bioswales, rain gardens, and other materials in order to improve their performance. We've seen a real lacking or up to 50% failure rate in our traditional rain gardens. And so how do we improve that? And so we're working with our stormwater public works folks to improve that performance. We're just getting into that part of it. One of the other parts we've done traditionally is starting out, because I'm in the health department, was working on urban agriculture. And one of the things that we found, this is from studies across the country, is that even though it says it's a pervious surface, say a lawn or a green space, the actual infiltration is pretty low because we're dealing with a clay, loamy soil. So a lot of it just runs across the surface, overland flow, and then becomes part of the problem. So one thing with biochar it does is reduces the bulk density and greatly increases the infiltration rate of the soil. And this is not just we're looking at in boulevard preparations as well as urban ag, but the developing along roadsides and develop pollinator corridors, et cetera. What we're looking at is increasing the infiltration. And even after the University of Delaware looked at this, and even after a period of 5 years, there was still up to 3 times increased infiltration over the traditional soils. On top of that, the biochar absorbs water, and it can hold up to 16 times its weight in water. So the rainwater infiltrates and holds it in that rooting area and helps the plants grow and later on transpire that water back out, resulting in cooling. One of the other things that we were chatting about before here are things like the traditional filters that you see. And we have a study with Andy Erickson at the University of Minnesota, who my partner knows, is working with another engineering firm. They developed up an iron sand filter amended with biochar. And we're talking about the TMDLs. Our TMDL that we have a problem with is E. coli. And it's mainly from geese, but the federal government doesn't differentiate between human and E. coli and goose E. coli. So we have a problem. And so the filters, we have the iron sand filters to take care of the phosphorus, which is another one of our TMD problems and works really well. But the biochar has been shown to be very effective in removing the E. coli. So that's one of the areas where we currently have it in the ground, and we're looking to expand that out. We have one of our lakes that has a specific PFAS standard, so we're looking at ways to use biochar, working with the Natural Resource Research Institute out of the University of Minnesota Duluth to develop up biochar filters to address the PFAS removal, particularly before it gets into the lakes. So those are some of the areas where we're looking at. It's still relatively young. I've been working with biochar since 2012, where I was trying to develop up a localized biochar production program for Afghan villagers in southern Afghanistan and brought it back to the city. Started in soil health, and now we're actively getting into stormwater. But as we develop up our own production, we intend to expand that further. I've been working with the Chesapeake Bay watershed out east as well, and they are currently now getting into biochar filters to handle the nitrates and reduce the nitrate loads in Chesapeake Bay. And that's across about 64,000 square miles. That is really starting to scale up, and they've adopted a wood biochar, just presented on that last year, and they've adopted that. So more to come, but infiltration, helping out traditional methods plus filtering out specific compounds doesn't do great on phosphorus, but nitrogen, metals, hopefully PFAS and pesticides that we're looking at, and E. coli are some of the methods where it is effective. It's not it's not a silver bullet, but it's part of a tool suite that you can implement in order to increase natural systems and the use of natural systems in your green infrastructure.
Thanks so much. Appreciate that additional perspective. I'm going to turn it over to Earl. We're going to transition to the world of sustainability and resiliency policy and how we can actually frame this out. So can you talk about how this has influenced your approach to climate adaptation in Denver alongside infrastructure projects and potentially any outcomes or changes as a result of these new policies?
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of start beginning on that, our climate sustainability and resiliency policy, the governing document that determines how we approach climate and how we partner with other either internal organizations or external organizations, as well as, for a department as big as ours, is really needed to make sure we're all marching to the same tune, and that everyone's focused on the climate goals that we have established, primarily around GHG reductions, fleet electrification, as well as greening up facilities. And so the idea behind this is, again, we want to make sure that everyone has the understanding of why we need to focus on this and what the goals are around this. And so we also have a a team in the city, the Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency team, which is much more broader than just the Department of Transportation and focuses on other areas of the city as well as public engagement efforts and everything around that. And so having that be the foundational document for how we build off of climate efforts from that. And so in terms of just results from that, it's all new, and so time will tell on that. But nonetheless, I think that making sure that, particularly on the waste and stormwater side, that and where we have green infrastructure work going on and a lot of different efforts, that's all aligned in with the city's climate goals.
And can you expand a little bit on the electrification of municipal vehicles and what that process has looked like?
Whew, it's a lot. So I always say on fleet electrification that the vehicles are the last thing you should be thinking about. And I say that because the funding, the policy, the charging infrastructure, the facilities, the workforce development, and all the other things that go into that are probably more important than when you start to think about vehicles. And so really making sure that we approach electrification from that perspective to make sure that we're doing it in a sustainable way, that we're doing it in a successful way, but also in a way that allows us to be flexible as technology pivots and learn new technologies and things of that nature. And so
Oh, I think it just clicks on and off.
all of these mics are a mess. But yeah, that's kind of how we're approaching it. I'm the co-executive sponsor of the electrification effort for the city and county of Denver, along with our chief sustainability officer. And so that's been a very interesting endeavor, particularly in the heavy duty EV space, which is not as developed as much as the light duty space, but is still progressing along very well. And so use case scenarios for refuse trucks, snow plows, or types of vehicles that aren't the typical standard run-of-the-mill vehicles. So a lot of work on that. We're working through budget and other priorities for 25, particularly in the EV space. And so more to come.
Wonderful. Appreciate that. I'm going to toss it to Brian, and we're going to chat a little bit more about partnerships and how you've successfully scaled some of these partnerships in Cook County that has led to this effective climate resilience outcomes. And in the same vein, I also wanted to bring in the conversation around balancing funding and long-term solutions.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to talk a little about that. And I think the partnerships at different scales is really an essential component of work that Cook County does on a whole host of topics, including climate resilience. For those of you who have worked in Northeastern Illinois, you know this. For some of you, this may be new to some others in the room, but governance in our region is pretty divided up among many different layers of local government. So we have the county. Within Cook County, we have 134 municipalities, but then we also have school districts, park districts, townships, water reclamation districts, all of which are doing great work, but it's it's challenging to get everybody sort of aligned on the same plans and objectives, let alone on implementing specific projects. Additionally, within Cook County, we have a lot of municipalities that are historically disinvested, that have less capacity in terms of financial resources as well as staff to take on this kind of work. So speaking of the climate resiliency planning program that I work on, a real goal there was to empower local partners to do this work. We wanted to set up a program where we could, from the county, fund a planning initiative, but then also attach funding to it for implementation. And I've worked in local planning for a decade in this region, and those of you who are planners have probably gotten to the point in the plan where you've got this great set of recommendations, and then you make a table that says, here are the different agencies you can apply to for funding. And that can be really helpful. It's great to have those ideas in a plan, but it's even better to have something. This is my first opportunity to work on a plan that has specific funding attached at the back end, where we can say, here's a long list of recommendations to improve climate resilience in this community. And we've arrived at that through a community-driven process, where we've really put the local partner at the forefront of the plan, steering that, engaging their stakeholders. And that long list of recommendations, we're not going to be able to fund everything that comes out of it, but we do have dedicated funding in each of the communities where we can take a few things off the top that are the highest priorities, that are short-term implementation, achievable, feasible, and things like that. And we're finding that that's really that motivated a lot of participation. We put out an open call to communities who kind of fit this definition of lower capacity, don't have an existing climate action or climate resilience plan. We got 26 applications from communities. We were able to select 5 of them. And I think it's having this implementation as a carrot at the end of the process has been super helpful for that. That's not always going to be possible, and we're really committed to continuing this kind of planning at every scale. But for this program, we found that having this integrated process over the life of the plan and implementation has been really helpful.
And of those 5 finalist projects, does one stand out to you as a sort of replicable model?
I mean, I would never pick a favorite among my children, but no, I mean, I think one of the things that's going to be really beneficial from it is the communities are not all the same. They're different sizes, they're in different contexts in terms of, what kind of development they're receiving, what kind of climate hazards they're facing. So there's commonalities across the program, but we also think that because we're working with 5 different communities with different characteristics, we're hoping to have models that are replicable from each of those to different communities. And, community A may be a good model down the road for community Z, but community 2 might be great for community 23. There hopefully will be lessons we can learn from across a diverse set of partners.
Appreciate that. And talking about partners and how you communicate with stakeholders, Richard, I wanted to bring you into the conversation around what that process looks like for you. And I also wanted to flag the potential for future dialogues around stormwater management and climate change and how these communities can be better prepared for these climate impacts.
Well, the key that we see is, again, the decision makers are not engineers. And a lot of times what we find, our focus is very, very specific, is relates to flooding and stormwater. And a lot of times we get their attention after a flood event, and it's a very narrow window of opportunity. So we have to basically meet our partners where they're at. It's not just about, as engineers, we kind of have a tendency of talking about, interesting acronyms like BFEs and high water level and stuff like that. And a lot of times these folks that we're engaging don't have that type of education or that background. I'd say 99% of the population really doesn't completely understand stormwater. So you're kind of in this situation where they're kind of been mugged and they're trying to figure out how to solve it. So one of the things that we really look at is like educating them. Really kind of talked about, stormwater infrastructure, I'll be honest with you, is a relatively new development. I'd say in the last 50 years, stormwater management has just been really implemented, and people don't understand that. And when we talk about like climate change and the risk associated with that, a lot of times they don't even understand their infrastructure that was built in 1950 and how do we plan for something for 2050. It's a challenge, but the thing is, I find that the big part about it is educating them, giving them kind of understanding of the risk that they're associated with, that really these capital projects that we have, while they will improve or reduce their risk, it's not going to eliminate the risk. I think a lot of these environmental events that we've seen recently kind of demonstrate that we cannot eliminate, we're not going to be able to build ourselves out of climate change. But I think if we're honest and kind of communicate in a manner that the decision makers and the public can understand, I think that kind of reduces that fear. And the other thing too is one thing that we really push whenever we're working with communities developing projects, we kind of push that solving stormwater is not a spectator sport, and that everybody's got to be involved with it. It's not like, oh, well, there's this one particular agency that's going to do it. No, it's like everybody, the residents, the municipalities, everyone involved's got to be involved. So that's kind of a big part of it, and developing feasible risks that meet their budgets is a big challenge too. So we try to look at how do we look at the available budget and what kind of level of service they can get out of a project.
Wonderful. Well, we've done some in-depth dives here. Our panelists will be around for discussion throughout the day. We're going to go ahead and conclude the panel with a very quick rapid-fire final takeaways, 30 seconds or less. We'll start with Earl. What do you want them to take away from your words today?
Electrification is more than vehicles.
There we go. Short and sweet. Bill.
All right, I'll try to be brief. And I'm just going to follow up on that last comment about flooding. It's a real issue, and this kind of complements their previous panel, which is fascinating. Artificial intelligence and machine learning, where we cannot build our way out of climate change, but we can be smarter about it, and we can be a little bit more prepared. And flash flooding is a very real issue. And we are now, as an agency, incorporating AI/ML into how we approach what I like to call ghost flooding, where previously we couldn't monitor everywhere, but now with IoT type sensors, they are very low. They're not going to say cheap, less expensive, but it gives us the ability to be almost everywhere. And now we can be much more informed and on where it occurs. We can use AI/ML to start using edge computing to route that water to areas that might be able to be willing to accept it, to start changing how we manage that water on site. So it's allowing us to be able to handle climate change a little bit better, and while we may be buying us some time to think about how we can reverse it.
Thanks, Brian.
Sure. Well, one thing I want to say is that, a lesson that I've taken away from my work on climate resilience with the county is the importance of not just the external partnerships I was speaking about, but also the internal partnerships. And, I'm with the Department of Environment and Sustainability, but we've been working closely with the Department of Transportation and Highways, the Bureau of Asset Management, the Bureau of Economic Development, because this issue really does touch all of our portfolios. And the other thing I'll just say is that another lesson we're learning, particularly in these communities that have less capacity to do long-term planning, is that a lot of what we're talking about with infrastructure for climate change, those are the same priorities for just maintaining infrastructure that they already have for a whole variety of reasons. So climate change just becomes one more impetus for solid planning and maintenance of the infrastructure that they have.
Thanks. Jim.
Make it quick. Biochar can help with infiltration of stormwater, clean stormwater, help cool your city while creating carbon sinks.
Richard.
And I just have to say that our dialogue needs to adapt with the client as well. One of the big cringes I have is the terminology 100-year event. I think it erodes our credibility when we talk as engineers. Is like, this is a 100-year event when we have one every year. So I think our dialogue needs to adjust with the climate as well.
Too true. And let me just say, thank you all for the service that you do to the public and for your years of public service in your communities. So with that, we'll conclude today's panel.